5. The most dangerous gang members inside ADX Florence, America's toughest prison. In the high desert of southern Colorado stands a prison so secure, so controlled, that escape is considered impossible, not as a boast, but as a documented reality. This is ADX Florence, officially the United States Penitentiary Administrative Maximum Facility. To those who run it, it is simply ADX. To those inside, it is often called the Alcatraz of the Rockies. A place built to hold men deemed too dangerous for any other prison in America. ADX Florence houses inmates who have proven they cannot be safely contained anywhere else, leaders of violent gangs, international terrorists, cartel bosses, and individuals whose influence or actions have caused deaths both inside and outside prison walls. Today, on the Inmate Diaries, we examine 5 of the most dangerous gang-affiliated inmates ever held inside ADX Florence. Men whose crimes are fully documented, whose presence here was not symbolic, but necessary. Before we begin, take a moment to support the channel. If you value fully factual, deeply researched prison and crime documentaries, please like this video and subscribe to the Inmate Diaries. Your support helps us continue sharing accurate, in-depth stories from behind the most guarded walls in America. ADX Florence, why this prison exists. ADX Florence opened in 1994, following a series of violent incidents at other federal prisons, including murders of correctional officers by inmates already serving life sentences. The Federal Bureau of Prisons concluded that a new type of facility was required, one designed not for rehabilitation, but for absolute containment. Inmates at ADX typically spend at least 22 to 23 hours per day alone in single-person cells. Human contact is minimal. Meals are passed through slots. Recreation, when permitted, occurs in isolated concrete enclosures. Placement at ADX Florence is not determined by notoriety alone. It is based on documented behavior, extreme violence, leadership in criminal or terrorist organizations, or the ability to direct crimes from inside prison. Many inmates here are also subject to Special Administrative Measures, or SAMs, restrictions authorized by the U.S. Attorney General to prevent communication that could result in death or serious harm. Inmate number 1. Joaquin El Chapo Guzman. Sinaloa Cartel. The first name on this list is Joaquin Guzman Lara, better known to the world as El Chapo. Guzman was the longtime leader of the Sinaloa Cartel, one of the most powerful and violent drug trafficking organizations in modern history. According to U.S. court findings, the cartel was responsible for importing hundreds of tons of cocaine, heroin, methamphetamine, and marijuana into the United States over several decades. But what made Guzman uniquely dangerous, even by cartel standards, was not just the scale of his drug operation. It was his ability to escape custody. Guzman escaped from Mexican prisons twice, once in 2001, allegedly hidden in a laundry cart, and again in 2015 through a mile-long tunnel dug beneath his cell. These escapes were confirmed by Mexican authorities and documented in court proceedings. In 2017, Guzman was extradited to the United States. 2 years later, in 2019, a federal jury in New York convicted him on 10 counts, including continuing criminal enterprise, drug trafficking, and firearms violations. He was sentenced to life imprisonment plus 30 years, with no possibility of parole. The U.S. Bureau of Prisons determined that no standard high-security prison could contain him. His documented history of escape, cartel command structure, and ability to order killings from custody made the risk unacceptable. Guzman was transferred to ADX Florence, where he remains under some of the strictest conditions imposed on any federal inmate. His communications are heavily restricted. His movements are tightly controlled. Unlike in previous incarcerations, there are no tunnels here, only reinforced concrete, steel, and silence. For the first time in his criminal career, Joaquin Guzman is in a place where power, money, and loyalty cannot reach beyond the walls. And he is not alone. Inmate number 2. Thomas Silverstein. Aryan Brotherhood. The second inmate on this list is a man whose actions inside prison walls directly shaped how the American Supermax system would be built. His name was Thomas Silverstein. Silverstein was a confirmed member of the Aryan Brotherhood, a white supremacist prison gang designated by U.S. authorities as a domestic criminal organization. By the early 1980s, the Aryan Brotherhood had established itself as one of the most violent and organized prison gangs in the federal system, involved in murder, extortion, and narcotics trafficking behind bars. Silverstein was already serving a lengthy sentence for armed robbery when he became involved in internal power struggles within the Aryan Brotherhood. In 1983, while incarcerated at the United States Penitentiary in Marion, Illinois, Silverstein murdered a fellow inmate, Clayton Fountain, by strangulation. Fountain was also a member of the Aryan Brotherhood. Court records and Bureau of Prisons findings indicate the killing was connected to internal gang conflict. Less than a year later, Silverstein murdered Merle Klutz, a federal correctional officer, during what prison officials described as a premeditated attack. Klutz was stabbed multiple times with a homemade weapon while escorting Silverstein. The murder of Officer Klutz sent shockwaves through the federal prison system. At the time, Marion was already one of the most restrictive prisons in the country. Silverstein's actions demonstrated that even maximum security facilities were not enough to contain certain inmates. Following the killing, Marion was placed on permanent lockdown. An unprecedented move that effectively ended normal prison operations. This lockdown would later become a blueprint for what ADX Florence would formalize. When ADX Florence opened in 1994, Thomas Silverstein was among the inmates transferred there. By that point, he had been sentenced to life imprisonment without parole, plus additional consecutive sentences. Silverstein spent more than 3 decades in near-total solitary confinement, longer than any other federal inmate in U.S. history. According to Bureau of Prisons records, this level of isolation was deemed necessary due to his documented history of extreme violence toward both inmates and staff. His confinement conditions became the subject of lawsuits and human rights scrutiny. Federal courts reviewed his case multiple times, but consistently ruled that the restrictions were legally justified based on security concerns. What is important, and fully documented, is that Silverstein's placement at ADX Florence was not symbolic punishment. It was a calculated decision rooted in precedent, multiple murders committed after incarceration. Thomas Silverstein died in 2019 while still in federal custody. At the time of his death, he remained one of the most tightly controlled inmates the Bureau of Prisons had ever managed. His legacy is not just one of violence, but of transformation. The prison built to contain men like Silverstein would soon house others whose influence extended far beyond cell walls. Inmate number 3, Larry Hoover. Gangster disciples. The third inmate on this list is a man whose influence was never based on physical violence alone, but on organization, command, and communication. His name is Larry Hoover. Hoover is the co-founder and longtime leader of the Gangster Disciples, a street and prison gang that originated in Chicago and grew into a nationwide criminal organization. According to federal court findings, the gang became involved in drug trafficking, extortion, money laundering, and acts of violence across multiple states. Hoover was convicted in Illinois State Court in 1973 for ordering the murder of William "Pookie" Young, a rival gang member. He received a sentence of 150 to 200 years in state prison. But Hoover's story does not end there. While incarcerated, federal investigators concluded that Hoover continued to direct Gangster Disciples operations from behind bars. According to a 1997 federal indictment and subsequent trial, Hoover used coded messages, intermediaries, and prison communications to oversee drug distribution and financial operations on the outside. In 1998, Hoover was convicted in federal court on charges including conspiracy to distribute narcotics, money laundering, and continuing criminal enterprise. The court sentenced him to 6 consecutive life terms in federal prison. The Bureau of Prisons determined that Hoover's ability to influence criminal activity, even while incarcerated, posed an ongoing threat to public safety. As a result, Hoover was transferred to ADX Florence and placed under special administrative measures. Under SAMS, Hoover's communications are among the most restricted in the federal system. His contact with the outside world is limited and closely monitored, based on court findings that even indirect messages could be used to relay orders. It is important to state clearly, Hoover has publicly claimed, through attorneys, that he renounced gang leadership in the 1990s. However, federal courts have repeatedly ruled that the restrictions remain justified based on evidence presented during his trial and sentencing. Challenges to his confinement conditions have been reviewed at multiple judicial levels. To date, courts have upheld the Bureau of Prisons' decisions, citing national security and public safety concerns. Unlike inmates whose danger lies in physical attacks, Hoover represents a different category of risk, one rooted in influence. His placement at ADX Florence reflects the Bureau's conclusion that words, not weapons, made him uniquely dangerous. Inside these walls, silence is enforced not only to prevent violence, but to stop ideas, orders, and networks from surviving incarceration. Inmate number 4, Barry Mills. Aryan Brotherhood. The fourth inmate on this list is a man federal prosecutors described as one of the most powerful white supremacist gang leaders ever to operate inside the U.S. prison system. His name is Barry Mills. Barry Mills was identified by the U.S. Department of Justice as a senior leader, often described as a commission-level figure, within the Aryan Brotherhood, one of the most violent and structured prison gangs in American history. According to federal indictments and trial evidence, the Aryan Brotherhood under Mills' leadership was responsible for drug trafficking, contract killings, extortion, and assaults both inside federal prisons and on the streets outside. Mills was not accused of impulsive violence. Instead, prosecutors portrayed him as an administrator, someone who authorized murders, approved punishments, and maintained discipline within the gang through coded communication and intermediaries. In 1997, Barry Mills was convicted in federal court of racketeering, conspiracy, and drug trafficking offenses. Court records indicate that much of the criminal conduct occurred while he was already incarcerated for prior crimes. The conviction resulted in a sentence of life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Federal prison officials determined that Mills' leadership role made him exceptionally dangerous, even without direct physical contact. Like other high-ranking gang figures, his ability to communicate was considered a primary security threat. Mills was transferred to ADX Florence, where he was placed under restrictive housing and intensive monitoring. According to Bureau of Prisons records and court filings, Mills was subjected to conditions designed to prevent him from issuing orders or maintaining gang cohesion. His communications were limited, screened, and, in some cases, prohibited. These measures were challenged in court, as with other ADX inmates. Federal judges consistently ruled that the restrictions were legally justified due to Mills' documented history of directing violence from custody. Barry Mills died in federal custody in 2018. At the time of his death, he remained classified as a high-risk inmate. His case reinforced a hard truth acknowledged by prison officials: removing a gang leader from the streets does not necessarily end their power. Sometimes, the prison itself becomes the battlefield. Inmate number 5, Hector Ayala. Mexican Mafia, LAIM. The final inmate on this list represents one of the most powerful and feared prison gangs in American history. An organization whose authority often extends far beyond prison walls. His name is Hector Ayala. Ayala was a confirmed member of the Mexican Mafia, also known as LAIM, a prison gang that originated in California during the 1950s and evolved into a highly organized criminal enterprise. According to federal and state law enforcement assessments, LAIM has been responsible for murders, drug trafficking, extortion, and control of prison yard politics across multiple jurisdictions. Publicly available records indicate that Ayala was involved in multiple acts of serious violence, including murder, connected to gang enforcement activities. Much of the detailed operational structure of LAIM remains sealed or redacted in court filings due to ongoing security concerns. What is confirmed is that Ayala's crimes were not limited to the streets. Prosecutors documented continued gang involvement and influence while incarcerated. An aggravating factor that weighed heavily in his sentencing and classification. Ayala received a life sentence in federal custody. The Bureau of Prisons later determined that his affiliation, history of violence, and continued gang influence made placement in a standard high-security penitentiary insufficient. He was transferred to ADX Florence, joining a small population of inmates deemed capable of orchestrating violence even under extreme confinement. Like other Mexican mafia members held at ADX, Ayala was subjected to severe communication restrictions. These measures were implemented to prevent the transmission of orders, retaliation directives, or coordination with gang members inside or outside the prison system. Due to the secretive nature of LAIM and the ongoing use of sealed records, some details about Ayala's day-to-day confinement remain not publicly documented. What is clear, however, is that federal authorities viewed his continued isolation as essential to maintaining safety within the prison system. In a place designed to neutralize influence, even silence is a form of control. The reality of ADX Florence. ADX Florence was not built to punish fame, notoriety, or ideology. It was built to contain risk, measured through documented violence, leadership, and the ability to cause harm even while incarcerated. The 5 men featured in this documentary represent different forms of danger: cartel power, ideological extremism, organizational control, and gang enforcement. What they share is a documented history that convinced federal authorities that no other prison was enough. For most inmates, incarceration marks the end of influence. For these men, it did not, until they arrived here. This is ADX Florence, America's toughest prison. And for those sent here, the last stop. Behind these walls, history doesn't end, it goes silent. The men held at ADX Florence are not here by chance, but by record, by evidence, and by decisions made in the name of public safety. If you found this documentary informative, like the video and subscribe to the Inmate Diaries. Your support allows us to keep bringing you fully factual, deeply researched stories from places few ever see. Until next time, stay curious, stay informed. And we'll see you in the next entry of the Inmate Diaries.